Gather around, everyone. Sharing the glow of our zoologist's campfire today is Matthew P. Rowe, professor of biology at the University of Oklahoma. Matt works in behavioral ecology, particularly predator-prey interactions, and he seems to really have a knack for finding super interesting systems, such as owls that pretend to be snakes by hissing, and squirrels that make themselves smell like rattlesnakes. Matt got on my radar due to his work on scorpions, bark scorpions, and those are in an arms race with their co-evolving predator, the grasshopper mouse. Matt and his wife Ashley have studied this particular case of an evolutionary arms race in great detail, and their work has always presented something of an aspirational dot on the horizon for my own scientific pursuits. And since it's my decision who comes on this podcast, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
All right, thank you very much. It's indeed an honor to be invited to your podcast.
Not
I
at
hope my
all.
stories are half as interesting as the other esteemed guests that you've already had share their stories around this campfire.
I'm sure they will be. But before we get started, I've wondered. I mean, as a fellow scorpion researcher, um, now grasshopper mice, this is a fantastic system that you've studied, and they change their receptors so that when they get stung, the venom doesn't act as something painful, but actually as an analgesic, and they feel actually less pain after a few seconds. But for us, the same venom causes pain, but have you ever experienced that pain yourself? Have you been stung by a bark
I,
scorpion?
yeah, I have been, and it was a glancing blow. I was being careless,
Always.
and yeah, always right. It's that intermediate level mistake when you're working with venomous animals. When you first start, you're scared to death, so you're always very attentive. And once you've been bitten or stung, you get attentive again. But when you get a little bit familiar with them, you get too casual. And I was putting a we were in a Florida Canyon in Arizona in the Santa Rita Mountains, and it was just
Mhm.
Ashley and I. And we were collecting scorpions and putting them in bark scorpions, Arizona bark scorpions, and putting them in a plastic bag. And I got careless, and I was holding the bag with my left hand, and I was placing the scorpion in with my right hand, and it stung me only in the cuticle of my finger,
Ooh,
which there are no really very few pain receptors there. So I
yeah.
didn't feel. Now I can share from colleagues who have been stung what they say a sting feels like. For me, there was no pain, but my arm went to sleep and it slowly moved up
Ah,
all the way to my elbow.
ooh.
It actually wasn't very sympathetic. She, we're still trying to collect, and I was feeling that sensation, and I turned to her and I asked her, if this gets to my heart, am I going to die? Because she's the toxinologist,
Hmm.
and it never got past my elbow, thankfully. But we have had, of course, we when we know people who have been stung, we try to tease out their experiences,
Yeah.
and as you know, pain is a variable thing, and it depends on how much venom you get. And
Yeah.
but a bad sting from an Arizona bark scorpion
Hmm.
has been described. The pain of it has been described as burning yourself with a cigarette and then driving a 16 penny nail through that burn.
Ooh.
And it can last for days,
Mm.
48 hours. So it's pretty intense. So that's my only experience with bark scorpions.
Very
And
lucky. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it could have stung me on my fingernail, and then I wouldn't have had to worry about. But
Sure.
anyway, yeah, that's my only close experience.
Okay. That's not too bad. That's not too bad. I've
No,
been way more careless, I think.
well, I've done other careless, silly things. In my youth, I try not to do that as much anymore. Yeah.
Well, and if you work with things like rattlesnakes, like you have, uh, you better not be careless. Yeah.
No, I know. Yeah, absolutely.
So you thought of a few good stories for us today. I'm really looking forward to hearing some. As I said in the introduction, you've worked with so many different animals, so many different places. So where would you like to take us first and when?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll start. I'll start with an early experience I had, and then I'll move into more recent stuff. Um, but in speaking of rattlesnakes, Ashley and I, of course, have had. I studied the interactions between rattlesnakes and rock squirrels and California ground squirrels for a number of years. And when we're out collecting scorpions now, working on the grasshopper mouse scorpion system, of course, rattlesnakes are quite abundant in the
Mm,
habitats that we work. So we have any number of occasions where we've interacted with rattlesnakes, and one of the first things for your audience to know is that they really do not want to strike,
oh,
right? They really, in fact, some of the research that I did early on in my career um, demonstrates that they only escalate to striking primarily if they are touched. So, if you
mm,
reach down and grab a rattlesnake, the most bites in the United States are what are called illegitimate bites.
okay.
They're typically delivered to young males between the ages of 15 and 30 who do something with a rattlesnake that they shouldn't do, right? Like, hey, oh, watch this, you know?
Yeah.
So, there was one occasion we were working in the Santa Rita Experimental Range research station run by the University of Arizona, south of Tucson, and this just epitomizes how unlikely it is that you get bitten. Now, we were careful because at night when you're collecting scorpions, you're using black lights and you're working in environments with jumping cholla and all kinds of nasty, just bushes that want to leap out and sting you. So we would wear snake chaps because rattlesnakes don't glow under black light.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Yeah, 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 for sure. So there was this one time we weren't wearing snake chaps. We were going out to bait our trap lines for catching grasshopper mice. And Ashley said, Matt, there's a rattlesnake. And I said, really? How close is it? And she said, well, it's licking my boot. Perfectly in a resting coil, a Mojave rattlesnake, which is one of the neurotoxic species.
Mm,
And it was tongue flicking. It wasn't tongue flicking aggressively, when they're really
yeah.
upset to do this. It was just doing and literally its tongue tips were touching Ashley's boot.
Oops.
She's tough. She just very calmly backed off.
Mhm.
The snake never rattled, never attempted to strike. So the story I was going to share isn't it was scarier,
Mm,
but for a very innocent reason. It was when I was an undergraduate, and I borrowed this is a very very long time ago. You
okay,
know, yeah,
good.
like 50 years ago.
Wow.
So some of your audience won't be familiar with how the safety systems in cars have changed. We all now
Right.
have that 3-point buckle up system, right?
Hmm.
And Ralph Nader, bless his heart, worked long and hard to get those safety measures required for new cars sold, at least in the United States. And so we now all get in and we have this shoulder belt and this lap belt, and they're very conveniently spring loaded. And
Yeah.
well, back in the day when the shoulder harnesses first came out, they weren't
Hmm.
spring loaded and they weren't attached to your lap belt. They
Okay.
hung in a harness above the passenger window for the passenger and the driver's window for the driver. And as an undergraduate, I was working on rattlesnakes and what their rattling meant to California ground squirrels, right? That the
Yeah.
squirrels would say, "Oh, this is venomous. I'm going to back off."
Mm,
Uh, and I had gone up to a field station in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas to pick up a rattlesnake that they had,
okay.
so that we could bring it back to the university. And I picked it up, and of course it was rattling. And I put it in an army um, ammo container, because that's where you transport snakes, and it was rattling. And my roommate's car was actually a kind of what in the States they would call a muscle car, like
Mm,
um,
big engine and
big engine,
yeah.
yeah, Dukes of Hazard kind of thing. If that's familiar to anybody, any of your audience.
Oh, very cool.
And the snake was rattling, and I was coming back. It was about a 2 hour drive down the freeway, and it was rattling, rattling, rattling. And then I just got lost in driving. Um, and all of a sudden, I felt this pop, pop on my shoulder,
Oh,
and the snake wasn't rattling.
oh,
And my brain leaped immediately to it got out, and I
yeah.
just bitten on the back of my back, on my left shoulder. It was the shoulder harness. It slipped out of his harness. I don't know how, but I swear I
You
checked every inch of that car driving 70 miles an hour down the freeway without losing control. That's the closest
you could have
example.
died of a heart attack
I
rather
could
than a
have,
snake
or
bite.
or just driven off the road. So anyway, um, but one of the things, especially for the people in your audience who are just getting started, I would love to share a couple of quotes that I think back on a lot because they were shared
Mm,
with me when I was an undergraduate. And um, for me, they encapsulate the joy of what we do, right?
mm,
What are those aha moments? And I've got a number of those, having done this for 40 years, longer if you count my graduate work and undergraduate research, that are so meaningful to us, right? The
mhm.
things that make us go, aha, that's just. And the two quotes, one is from Isaac, and I can't compare myself to either of these scientists. One is Isaac Asimov, right?
Oh, yeah. Well,
Not just a great scientist, but man, a wonderful science fiction writer.
yes, of
And
course.
he once said, he said, um, the nicest phrase, the most exciting phrase you can ever hear in science, one that heralds new discoveries, isn't Eureka, I've discovered it, but that's weird. That's why is that animal doing that?
That's funny. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Exactly
so
that.
the other is Louis Pasteur,
Mm,
whose work on, again, just it's said, and it's related to Asimov's, chance favors the prepared mind.
mm, yeah.
And what he meant by that was so much of what we do, so much of what we discover is often based on serendipity, right? You just
Yes.
happen to be in the right place at the right time to see something, some
Yeah.
anomaly, and you think that's really, really strange. But the trick is to be knowledgeable enough
Mhm.
that you recognize that it's strange, that
Is
it's,
that how you got to those great systems that you found? Did you
yeah,
ever serendipitously stumble upon
yeah,
one of these?
yeah, I'm the luckiest guy alive. I mean, seriously, no, Ari, yes, there are three of them in particular that just epitomize those two quotes.
Okay, well, I would love to
Yeah.
hear that.
Okay. So, um, man, um, oh gosh. So the most productive one of those is what got Ashley and I interested in the grasshopper mouse scorpion system.
Mm, yeah, it's a
It's
great system.
it's yeah, and it's the one that has held our attention for the last, decade and a half, almost 2 decades. And that all started. Ashley had done a master's looking at the population genetics of bark scorpions
Mm,
throughout the southwest of the United States.
sure.
I was, of course, working on rattlesnakes in colonial ground squirrels, but also working on other projects with my students. And Ashley, after her master's, started teaching high school.
Mm,
She Yeah, she did that for a couple of years. And then she just basically said, you go off every summer and have all this fun out in the field. And, and so she went back later in her life. She was in her mid 30s, late 30s, and she went back and got her PhD.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so in thinking about what she wanted to do, it was one of those aha moments where she had gotten interested in scorpion venom.
Okay.
And as you well know, scorpion toxins are a cocktail of literally hundreds
Yeah.
of peptides, two,
Hmm.
300 maybe in a bark scorpion. And as you well know, with your elegant work on scorpions, which is
Wow.
phenomenal. No, it really is. It's the primary prey of scorpions are, of course, arachnids or
Hmm.
insects. And many of those toxins are specific to their prey. But it had been fairly well known, based upon some research that had come out of Mexico, that bark scorpions also had peptides in their venom that were potentially lethal to small mammals.
Yeah.
And we were just talking one evening or out walking, and it was probably Ashley said, well, why why do bark scorpions have mammal specific lethal toxins? They don't
Mm.
eat mammals,
Nope.
right? They don't eat mammals. So, having worked with ground squirrels and rattlesnakes and knowing that whole story about, how the squirrels are resistant to rattlesnake venom, well, obviously they're probably being preyed on by some mammal.
Hmm.
And Ashley asked, well, what mammal do you think I should start with? And I said, grasshopper mice.
Okay.
As in certain parts of the US, and this had actually been published, some work had been done showing that grasshopper mice do eat scorpions, but all of that work had been done with scorpions that were not neurotoxic.
Right.
And in certain parts of the US, grasshopper mice, which for your audience are tiny little mice with short, stubby tails, they're only about 30 grams, and they're not typical mice, they're top level carnivores, and they eat all kinds of nasty stuff.
Wow.
Mostly arthropods. They eat pinacotti beetles that have these really noxious sprays. They eat tarantulas. They eat these giant centipedes. And in
Wow.
certain regions of the U.S., their common name was called scorpion mice.
Mm. Okay.
And
Well, that's
so we
yeah.
thought, well, this is the first animal we should see. And the mammalogists we talked to said, oh, grasshopper mice will not eat bark scorpions. It
Really?
will avoid them.
Okay.
And of course, we had to test that, and sure enough, they they do eat the and they're not adept at not getting stung
Uh-huh.
and stung. And the research over the last decade and a half has demonstrated that the mice are almost completely resistant. Well, they're completely resistant at a functional level to the peptides and bark scorpion toxins that are lethal to small mammals. In fact, they can eat one of the more lethal members of the Centroides family
Hmm.
found in Mexico, whose sting is lethal to humans,
Wow.
especially
Yeah.
kids.
And these
And they
tiny
eat
little mice
those.
can take it.
Yeah, they eat them like popcorn.
Yeah. Yeah.
We understand how they do that. It's a mutation in one of the ion channels that is, or actually a couple of them that are the targets of the scorpion toxins that cause your diaphragm to shut down.
Yeah.
It
No more breathing. Yeah.
Yeah, no one reading it. But the other thing, and this is really fun and exciting, is we discovered that the mice are also resistant, not completely, also resistant to the toxins that cause pain.
Yeah.
And as venom has kind of two main functions in the critters that um, possess venom. They can use it to capture prey.
Hmm.
They can also use it to deter potential enemies. And one of the things that distinguishes those two broad categories is that you don't need to have a painful venom to capture your prey. You just
Uh-huh.
need to slow it down. So those venoms tend to be paralytic. You only need a pain component if you're using your venom to deter a potential predator.
Yeah.
And so most defensive venoms are both, they have some component of tissue damage or neurological dysfunction, and it's paired with an immediate sensation of intense pain.
Yeah.
And
Pain
people
is the
had,
advertisement, right?
it is, it's
Yeah.
exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And people had wondered, well, are both necessary? Could you
Hmm.
have a defensive venom that wasn't painful but was toxic? Or could you have one that was only painful but not toxic?
Hmm.
And the grasshopper mice, this is another one of those little aha moments, presented us with an opportunity to disentangle those two components.
Which is
Because
a super rare opportunity
it
and really
was.
important for the evolution of venoms. Yeah.
Yeah, we just, because the mice are resistant to the toxins that kill, it's only the pain components that are driving their decisions, their choice of whether or not to eat a bark scorpion. So we
Yeah.
did those experiments. And long story short, pain is necessary because it gets the scorpion dropped, but
Hmm.
it's not sufficient because even though a grasshopper mouse, which feels a tiny fleeting bit of pain, and I could share with your audience why that is. A bark scorpion sting, as I've mentioned before, can cause in us unbearable pain for 2 days.
Hmm.
For grasshopper mice, it's tiny. It lasts about 3 seconds. They might drop the scorpion. The pain is gone. In fact, they're co-opting the pain component, turning it into an analgesic.
Yeah.
So now they don't feel the pain and they go right back and they eat the scorpion. So pain is, as you correctly identified, is the signal, but
Mm.
it's got to be for a long-term strategy, right? It's got to be paired with some kind of debilitation.
Yeah, it actually has to have a real threat attached to it. It's amazing to hear the background of this system that I know so well, and I read all your papers, of course, about it.
But
And so the prepared mind in this case was you knowing that these grasshopper mice eat scorpions.
yeah,
And how
yeah.
did you happen to know that? How did was what?
Well, I mean, literature,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I was familiar with the publications that and with their common name,
Mm.
scorpion mice in certain parts of the U.S. I
Yeah,
don't
it's a
even
big
know
clue.
where I
Yeah.
ran across that, but was familiar with some of the reports that they would eat things like giant desert hairy scorpions, which are not neurotoxic.
Which are
So,
probably bigger than the mice themselves.
oh,
Yeah.
they are. Yeah, no, Ari, these mice, we joke that if they were the size of a honey badger, honey badgers would be afraid.
Elephants would be afraid. Yeah.
Yeah, elephant,
Wow.
they might. Well, yeah, yeah, so true. So that
Wow.
was one of the aha moments, and I have a couple other I could share.
Mhm.
Uh, but I also have anecdotes about various animals that now that when I'm sitting around at night, maybe drinking a glass of wine, or it just brings a smile to my face, remembering
Oh,
thinking back on these interactions.
that
Uh,
those are fantastic.
okay,
A small moment alone with an animal that you, yeah,
yeah,
remember forever, probably.
yeah, absolutely. So I'll share two if I don't get too long-winded.
Oh, please. Yes.
Um, One was when I was in Africa studying baboons in the middle of the Okavango.
Oh,
So
baboons. Right.
yeah, this well, almost seems like a lifetime ago.
Hmm.
So I was
When is this more or less? Which year should we?
this was during graduate school, and was
Okay.
actually hoping to look at the anti-predator behavior of baboons
Hmm.
for my doctoral project.
Okay. Yeah.
It did not work out for a couple of reasons, and that's when I came back and I got interested in, found out, I can tell you about the burrowing owl aha. That became part of my dissertation. But I
Okay.
got over to Africa, the Marimi Wildlife Reserve in the Okavango Delta, which is a very remote, very was then, I hope it still is now, pristine
Hmm.
ecosystem with all of the top level predators, leopards and lions and black, all of that.
Must be
And
gorgeous. I've only seen it in documentaries, I'm afraid. It
oh,
must be great to
Ari,
be there.
yeah, it was. So I was there twice, 5 months in 1980, 4 months at the end of my PhD, 1984.
Hmm.
And both times I was looking at baboons. And I had hoped, like I said, to study the interactions between baboons and in particular leopards,
Uh-huh.
because there were reports from herbivore that didn't make a lot of biological sense, that baboon troops had a very interesting geometry where they would, forage through the environment, and subadult males would be on the perimeter, and adult males with the young would be in the center, and then
Mm,
the adult males were protecting the phalanx of subadult males are out there to defend the entire troop. And of course, it
okay.
didn't make any sense based upon what we know about selfish genes and natural selection, right,
Yeah.
and kinship and all that. So I was going to test that model. And as it turns out, it wasn't testable because baboons, at least in the Morami, don't forage as a tight knit group. They are just strung out along a long line. And the
Uh,
predators, like leopards and lions, typically wouldn't show themselves to the part of the troop that. And we had to you walk with these baboons on foot, and
okay.
yeah, you couldn't drive. And the
Yeah,
Morami,
it's a delta. It's almost quite
yeah,
swampy, I imagine, and very hard to
yeah.
get to each any part in that
Yeah,
area.
yeah. So, and in fact, the Boro River comes down out of the Angola Highlands, and
Mm,
the highlands get their rain in January and February, and then the high water slowly works down to the delta, which is a big Okanagan Delta, big inland sink,
hmm.
and basically there's no exit to the sea; it just all
Yeah.
evaporates. And so during the low water season, the baboons make some water crossings, but not many. I'm actually jumping stories here, but I'll come back to the other one. Um, but then as the water level rises up, there are, it just becomes a gigantic swamp
Ah,
with long open stretches of water and pockmarked by these little islands. And so the
mhm.
baboons have to traverse these water crossings.
Mm.
And yeah, I've switched gears here, so maybe you can edit this so it makes the transition a little less choppy. But um, but the baboons were just deathly afraid of crossing water.
Okay. So there was
They
something in the water that scared them.
Yes, and they would
Mm.
come to a water crossing and they would sit there
Hmm.
for an hour up in trees, scanning the water, alarm barking,
Huh.
looking out, general sense of agitation on the part of the troop. And and then eventually they would start to move across the water crossing. And they were adept at
Hmm.
choosing the path that was shallowest to get from one island where they were foraging to another.
Sure. Yeah.
And but the reason they were so agitated was because of crocodiles.
All right.
And so, in fact, the baboons are so afraid of crocodiles that they wouldn't drink at a water crossing. The little camp we had in the Morami, we had
Mm.
a we had a pump, and we'd pump water directly out of the Boro River and drink it, and it was perfect. It was clean.
Wow.
There was, yeah, but the baboons would never drink at these water crossings. Instead, they would drink in the middle of an island in a rain puddle.
Really?
Yes, that
Ah.
looked to us to be not a safe place to drink if parasites were what you were most afraid of. But they were justifiably afraid of crocodiles.
Mm.
And so when I was there in 80 and again in 84, especially in 84, there were only two researchers in camp, and one of them had finished their data collection. So I was out walking around with the baboon troops by myself. And I always felt fairly safe
Okay.
when I made a water crossing. Some of these could be 50 meters long.
Okay.
They
That's
get
quite a
up
ways out.
way
Yeah.
deep. And some of the the tour guides that we became friends with in the town of Mount said they would never make a water crossing that was more than knee deep, ever.
Okay. All right.
But um, when I was with we studied two different troops, one of which roosted in camp. It was called
Hmm.
camp. And when I was studying camp troop and they would go out and they would make these water crossings and come back, I at least felt safety in numbers because
Right.
I was one of 70, right?
Yes.
And so I think if there is a crocodile, my chances, it's the selfish herd phenomenon.
Mhm.
But sometimes they would make a decision to roost on a different island, and I'd have to make these water crossings back to camp by
Right.
myself.
Probably at
That
the end of the day.
at the end of the day, right? You can't not go home.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wasn't good at climbing palm trees. So I'd make these water crossings, and I was
And
smiling when. Go
and I
ahead.
imagine those are Nile crocodiles. Those are
Those are Nile crocs.
not
They're big.
little
No,
tame
they're big and they're
cayman.
dangerous.
No, they're
Yeah,
huge.
yeah.
Yeah.
There was actually we had friends studying brown hyenas and lions in the Kalahari. They were funded by the Guggenheim Foundation, and one of the Guggenheim people came out to visit them, looked at their, and then went up to the Okavango
Mhm.
and was bathing and got eaten by a croc. So,
Wow.
you know,
Okay.
yeah. So it's the threat is real.
Yes.
Um, so I was smiling when I was listening to Rodrigo Villamart's story about the grizzly bear and how one of his grad students, pulled out their. All of us carry the Swiss Army knife, the little red, right? He pulled it
Yes.
out. So when I was making these water crossings by myself, I'd pull out my little Swiss Army knife and I'd open up the biggest blade and walk with it. And the only thought going through my head is, you can't, a crocodile has a skull. You're just, I
Yeah.
might as well just take that knife if I get jumped by a crocodile. Anyway, that's probably the greatest risk that I've taken over my career. But I got started on that because one of my drinking wine, looking back and thinking about animals, wild animals I have known, to steal a
Yes.
line, Ernest Thompson Seton, was a little baboon called Wimpy.
Ah.
Now, Wimpy, he was about a year and a half old, 18 months,
Hmm.
which puts him uh, kind of developmentally into that middle school age for
Hmm.
people, kind of a
Yeah.
sixth grade little boy. And he was just mischievous as heck. Anybody that doesn't believe in evolution, just go study a primate anywhere. Spend some time with them, and you're going to recognize they lie, they cheat, they have friends, they grieve, they have fun. It's
Hmm.
all of the emotions that anyway.
Yeah.
So Wimpy discovered we had a outhouse. It had half of a toilet seat, the bottom half, right? And
Okay.
it
Yeah.
was broken in half. So we only had because this is a remote part of Africa. It's very difficult to
Sure.
supply something. So we had half of a toilet seat. And toilet paper was really, really hard to, that was just a precious commodity. Well, Wimpy discovered that he could get our attention if he ran into the outhouse, grabbed the tail end of the toilet paper, ran through camp. And because this was so precious to us, we were running after Wimpy, gathering up all this toilet paper, and he would start to scream, and that would attract the attention of the big males who,
Oh.
oh yeah, and male. The canines on a male baboon are bigger than on a leopard,
Mm.
and they would, oh my gosh. So, but that wasn't his coup de grace. His coup de grace. But we did try to have a Land Rover for a while, and it just wasn't functional. So we buried it, but we cannibalized the top
Okay.
and turned it into a solar water collector. But prior to that, to take a warm shower, you heated up a 5-gallon bucket of water over the fire. You poured it
Mm.
into another 5-gallon bucket that had a spigot attached to the bottom. You
Right.
hoisted it up, right, and it was great. But one of the
Huh.
uh, one of the other grad students who was there when I was there in 1980, whose father was an architect, designed this thing. So we had this roof of a Land Rover, and we had
Uh-huh.
some corrugated tin, and we got some garden hose, and we sprayed the whole thing black,
All
and we turned
right.
it into a solar panel.
Right.
It,
That'll work.
yeah, it did. It worked great, and of course, you had to cover it the roof
Hmm.
with a thin film of plastic.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's even harder to get than toilet paper.
Uh-oh.
So you can see where this is going.
Yeah.
Wimpy, Wimpy discovered he could run in, he could rip the plastic off of our solar collector, and even got a bigger reaction from us. So we had to, and it still didn't work. We had to pile all of these acacia branches around the solar panel to try to keep Wimpy from wreaking havoc. Now, there's one little more anecdote of Wimpy, and this is the reason I smile when I think of him. One, I don't know. I don't think I was that mischievous when I was in middle school, but he had something to him.
Mm,
There was one day, and this has always been special to me, where typically in the morning, if the troop roosted in camp, they'd get
sure.
up slowly, which is kind of nice, and you'd get up and make some coffee and toast some bread or something, and you'd be taking a census, the morning census, when the baboons are all out ventral basking in the sun, and they're not, because then they're quiet. And I was doing that one morning, and lost in thought and recording who was where,
Uh-huh.
because leopards would sometimes come in, and you couldn't always be guaranteed that the baboons who went up in the trees at night would still be there in the morning.
Wow. Okay.
And I was taking a census, and all we wore was shorts and flip-flops,
Mhm.
because especially in high water season, you couldn't wear shoes because you'd get foot rot
Right.
from, you get a fungal infection. And it was warm enough, you really didn't need anything other than a pair of shorts. And so I was taking notes, and I felt a little pressure on both knee at the same time.
Okay.
Not not scary, just gentle. And I looked down, and there's Wimpy,
Oh,
and he was standing on his hind legs. And this is one of those moments where you feel that connection. And he had a hand on each one of my knees, and he looked up, and I looked down, and it was a
oh,
communal
amazing.
moment. Yeah. So that's one, if you've been at it as long as I have, that's one that, of many, many of those special moments, which is in part why we do what
That
we do.
when a wild animal like that sees you and interacts with you, it's a special
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah,
How long
totally.
had you been there before you got that connection with Wimpy?
They so um they yeah, they so the camp troop, which was the one that was studied the most often, there were other researchers, other grad students that had been there before me,
Hmm.
and um they were habituated to, this is going to sound terrible, they were habituated to Caucasians
Right.
come in and study them.
Yeah.
If a novel Caucasian came in, they would be very wary of them for 2 weeks, a week or two. So you
Hmm.
would you would have to be off on the edges, and
Right.
then gradually, um, if one of the local people came and wanted to work with the baboons, we didn't have anyone want to work with the baboons, and that's our fault for not better involving the Botswanans in that
Mm,
research, in my opinion. Um, the baboons would take a lot longer to habituate.
right.
So they were very adept at recognizing faces.
Mm,
Uh, but yeah, because of the previous researchers there, it didn't take months for
right.
me. Now, when in that process did Wimpy come up and put his little, probably much later than that. He
Right. You
had to,
really had to gain his trust over a long period
yeah,
of
yeah,
time.
even though we chased him all the time, you know.
Well,
We
chased,
never got him.
followed
We never
with a notebook, I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, we never caught him. And of course he I think he took great fun in watching us cower to the big males that we would attract. And thank goodness the big males never, because they could have really uh, that could have been
Well, but as you said about the rattlesnakes that don't really want to bite, for every predator or defensive animal that has a great weapon, there's also a risk
that's so true.
because a rattlesnake still has to put his head quite close to you and can break off his teeth or can be smashed in the head. They have a very fragile skull, and I guess for baboons, there's also a risk in attacking a human. I mean,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
can't do very much, but we can do something.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So
So
nobody wants to attack. Nobody wants to be attacked.
not no.
Yeah,
And for the, in terms of the systems that you and I have studied, there's even a cost of venom production.
right. Yeah.
So, to for animals like rattlesnakes and scorpions that use their venom both to capture prey and to deter predators, if you can get a predator, a potential enemy, to back off
Hmm.
without injecting
Yeah.
venom,
Even
then
better.
you've got saved
Yeah.
so you can eat the next day. So
Right, right, right. Yeah, I noticed when reading again through your CV that that you work with Bill Hayes, who's also
I
studied. Yeah,
yeah, I've worked with Bill.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He also studied the expenditure of scorpion venom, right? Yeah,
He did a lot of that work on
yeah,
venom. Yeah, he sure
yeah.
did.
With Zia Nisani, his grad student, and I know him because I stayed at his place when I was looking at scorpions in the U.S. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, it's a
Yeah,
small world.
it is. It
Yeah.
is. So, I have other anecdotes about animals. I've got other aha moments.
So you've worked with so many animals. Is there one group that's your favorite? Because most biologists have a favorite group, right? I mean, we shouldn't say it, but we do.
Oh, Ari, that's so tough.
Oh, I know,
So,
I know. When I'm going through my collection of scorpions in the lab with my grad student, it says
yeah,
every second species you say this is your favorite species. Well, yes, at that moment it is.
that's true. That's true. Yeah, I mean, so obviously grasshopper mice, because they are
Yeah.
so amazing, and they eat so many. I mean, one of the projects we're working on now is how is it that they can eat these? Some people call them bombardier beetles, but that's an
Mm.
incorrect label. They're darkling beetles or pinnacati beetles,
And
and they
nothing
can't
eats
under.
darkling beetles. Almost
Hmm?
nothing. I mean, some spiders are specialized in
Yeah,
darkling beetles, but
grasshopper mice again eat them like popcorn.
yeah.
And the Tom Eisner, which is a name you're probably familiar with, the
Mm,
one of the original evolutionary biochemists, right? Ecological chemistry, documented he thought that grasshopper mice ate darkling beetles by grabbing them, sticking
mm,
their butts in the ground so that the spray, this noxious,
mm.
benzoquinone spray that can really damage your eyes, would be dispersed harmlessly in the sand.
Okay.
And so we tested that. And as it turns out, grasshopper mice get better at feeding on darkling beetles, but they get sprayed a lot.
Okay.
But it's kind of like the scorpion thing. They will come back after getting sprayed until the beetle runs out of spray, and at that time the grasshopper mice eats them.
Huh.
And you can be out in the field and you can see a carapace of a darkling beetle that a grasshopper mouse is eaten, because they eat the innards, right?
Right,
Kind
right,
of
right.
like yeah, but anyway, so grasshopper mice, but oh my gosh, I've studied burrowing owls, I've studied saw-whet owls. There's one of those anecdotes about cute animals that, wild animals I have known. I was working with a graduate student looking at the impact of urbanization on burrowing owls in Florida.
Hmm.
a long time ago. And burrowing
These are these
owl,
very small, cute owls,
they're
right?
small, cute.
Yeah.
They are fossorial in the sense that they will use abandoned prairie dog or ground squirrel burrows
Hmm.
uh, to raise their young. You know, it's where they nest. It's their refugium. And when it rains or when a predator comes along. And I got interested in burrowing owls because of this report that they had a hiss that sounded like a rattle of a rattlesnake. And
Hmm.
anyway, that was one of those aha moments. But the anecdote I was going to share, when a graduate student, my first graduate student, and I were looking at the impact of burrowing owls, urbanization on burrowing owls in Florida, Cape Coral, Florida. They have these big clutches, and they have lots of little um, owlets, and the
Yeah.
owlets are staggered in size because they're asynchronous hatchers. So
Hmm.
you might have 8 of them.
Wow.
And the burrow mound gets bigger, you know. And there was one time, and we were documenting because the impact of urbanization on burrowing owl colony down there. And the little ones oftentimes stand close together, waiting for mom or pop to bring in food. And they're so funny because they'll stand there and they'll try to take your bearing by, you know, tilting their head. I can't tilt my head nearly as far. They can literally tilt their heads this far. And there was one time, Ari, my graduate student and I were watching this group of burrowing owlets, and they were lined up in a
Hmm.
line in perfect descending height. Oldest, the next oldest, the next oldest, the next
Wow.
oldest to this young one. And we used our car as a blind because it was an urban area and it worked pretty well. But they were doing this, and it was synchronous. They were doing this back and forth, tilt their head, tilt their head.
Oh,
And
wow.
the lowest one on the very end tilted his head so far, he fell over.
Oh, that's very cute.
we were we were laughing so hard. It's in our field notes. You know, it goes right in the rain notebooks. It was anyway. It was yeah. So what are my favorites? I've been very lucky, very blessed to have spent a lot of time in the field studying a lot of interesting critters.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, I wish I had another lifetime to do it because it's magical. It's just such a joy.
It is. I'm just imagining the outlet. Were you able to attribute that to urbanization or?
But I guarantee you, he to us anthropomorphizing, he seemed so embarrassed by it. You know, he got shook himself off and kind of looked around, hope nobody saw. So yeah, we shouldn't attribute human emotions to our study animals, but sure looked that way.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
so, and I don't know if we're running out of time, but one of
No,
the
no.
other aha moments
Sure.
relates to burrowing owls, and that suggestion that they might have a hiss that sounds like a rattlesnake's rattle.
Yeah.
This had been first documented back in the late 1880s by early naturalist named Samuel Garman.
Hmm.
And he wrote a paper in 1888 that it was an anecdote, which he was out in the Great Plains, and they had seen a burrowing owl because burrowing owls use abandoned prairie dog and ground squirrel burrows, except in Florida where they have learned to dig their own, I guess because the soil is so sandy.
Uh-huh.
But in the West, they use abandoned colonial silurian burrows. And so you oftentimes get ground squirrels or burrowing prairie dogs and burrowing owls and even rattlesnakes in the same
Mhm.
area. In fact,
Yeah.
Ernest Thompson Seton calls it the happy family, right? Where the owl stands guard, the rattlesnake provides safety for the prairie dog or squirrel pups that are in the burrow.
Hmm.
And that myth got started maybe in part because of Garman's report. They were out in the Great Plains and they saw a burrowing owl run down into a prairie dog burrow.
Yeah.
And as an early naturalist, they wanted to go collect it. So they were digging the burrowing owl out of the prairie dog hole, and they heard a hiss. They
Uh-huh.
heard a rattle, actually. They described it as the rattling sound of a rattlesnake. And it turned out to be a burrowing owl. And
Wow.
so that was the earliest report that I could find of burrowing owls mimicking rattlesnakes. Now, I didn't actually believe that. I thought, well, that's pretty far fetched,
Mm-hmm.
But a totally different project. I was looking at it's a comparative project examining, again, the anti-predator behavior of two closely related species of blackbirds, red-winged blackbirds that are territorial,
Uh-huh.
okay, and tricolored blackbirds that look almost identical to them that nest in mass. And they both
Right.
nest in bunches. And the tricoloreds, the colonies can be 30,000 birds,
Oh, wow.
and
Yeah.
close, 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 close. And so I was looking at how they responded to potential avian predators.
Mm-hmm.
I was using birds at the University of California, Davis Raptor
Mm-hmm.
Rehabilitation Center that couldn't be released.
Right.
Great horned owls and Cooper's hawks, which are known bird predators, and magpies. And I was tethering them either next to a blackbird, territory or a tricolored blackbird marsh.
Right.
And I had taken a great horned owl out from the Raptor Center and had done my presentations and got those recorded. And I brought the great horned owl back to the Raptor Rehabilitation Center. And the director of the center said, Matt, come
Mm-hmm.
take a look at this guy. He's really cute. And he had a cardboard pet carrying box,
Right.
one of those,
Yeah.
foldable ones. And he opened it up just a couple of inches. And so I came over and I put my head down right on top of this. Before my eyes could become adjusted to the darkness at the bottom of this box,
Mm-hmm.
I heard a rattlesnake rattle. And I jumped back and I probably swore at the director, whose
That's
name I
not
still
cute.
remember. Yeah, that's not funny. Wow. Anyway, it turned out to be a burrowing owl.
Wow.
And I had spent a couple of years studying rattlesnake rattling. And
Mm.
I was, well, of course, at that point I was convinced.
Yeah.
And so that led to the whole study where we demonstrated that the hiss is indeed effective at mimicking a rattlesnake's rattle. And it's even effective against ground squirrels from populations of squirrels that are knowledgeable about rattlesnakes,
Yeah.
who can, from the rattlesnake's rattling sounds, tell whether the snake is big
Wow.
and warm or small and cold. So
Wow.
these are
Yeah.
sophisticated dupes, right? If
Yeah.
anybody,
Their
they
life
should
depends on
tell
it,
them.
on recognizing these things.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
even they were duped. So
Wow. So, and that's amazing because when we think about mimicry, people always think about color patterns and bright
right.
colors and but never about sounds or smells. And I really like that of your research that you find mimicry in all these modalities of sensory modalities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It smells is a tough one to crack, but it's got to be pretty common.
It's got to be. Once we get better sensors for smells, I think we will find so much more
I
in that
agree.
area. Yeah,
For
a very
sure.
unexplored area of biology.
It is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow. That's amazing. It's cool. And then to think that it fooled the squirrels that are, well, their life depends on it, on recognizing
Yeah.
a rattlesnake. So
Yeah. 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 Yeah, for sure. So yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. I wasn't, when you're younger, you do things that you think back on and you think, well, maybe I really shouldn't have done that. So my last day in the Okavango swamps in 1984, and I'd interviewed at Appalachian State University before going out. They offered me the job while I was still out there. So, back then it was, and it's still not easy to get jobs in academia,
Oh, tell me about it.
especially as a field biologist, as
Yeah.
you well know, as you know. So I jumped at the chance for a tenure track position at Appalachian State University. and had funding to stay longer in Africa, but I couldn't afford not to. And so it was my last night, and there was one other researcher in camp, and we had this little zodiac that we used to get around, because what we'd have to do to get in and out of our camp, which is called baboon camp, you had to go downriver to a tourist camp that was a
Mm.
few miles downriver, where they had a dirt airstrip, and you could fly to the nearest town, which was called Mount. And we knew a researcher upriver who was part of a British team trying to figure out, and I hope they haven't succeeded, but maybe they have, I haven't followed up on it, how to get rid of tsetse flies from the
Oh,
Okmulgee Delta.
oh wow.
Yeah, and tsetse flies carry, as you probably know, a couple of different kinds of trypanosome. One causes human sleeping sickness, the other causes cattle sleeping sickness called nagana.
Mm.
And areas in Africa that still have good wildlife populations, not coincidentally, oftentimes have tsetse flies,
Yeah.
because it keeps cattle out, right? It prevents pastoralists from coming in. So I don't know the status of that program, but we went up to visit with him and have a couple of beers. And so we went up and we were visiting, and he was sitting on the edge of his boat, which was an aluminum, just a little aluminum boat. And we were sitting on the edge of our little Zodiac, tiny Zodiac, with our legs dangling in the water.
Okay.
Stupid. Stupid. Yeah, I mean, come on, I should have known better.
Y-
It could easily have ended in a non-humorous fashion,
Yes.
right?
Crocodiles. Yes.
Yes. But luckily it didn't. So the guy that was studying tsetse flies, how to eradicate them, got up to go get us a couple more beers.
Okay.
Okay, because we were young. And he got out, and of course, we're just in short cutoffs, right? Got out, and his legs were covered in leeches. Covered. He must have had, he must have had 10, he must have had a dozen or more on each leg. It was like a Christmas tree, a white Christmas tree with long black ornaments, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. They can be big, right? I mean,
These guys are a couple inches. And the other guy I was with, I won't share his name. We started laughing. We were laughing so hard. He just got, because what you do is you're supposed to just slap him off, right?
mm,
And he was doing that. And of course, everyone he slapped off, there'd be this train of blood going down his
yeah,
leg.
because they have an anticoagulant and it just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
keeps bleeding, these little
It
wounds.
keeps
Yeah.
bleeding.
Yeah.
And then it hit my coworker and I at exactly the same time.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, wait a minute. And of course, we had to do the slap dance. So that, yeah, anyway, be careful at who and what you laugh at, right? But yeah, fond
Every,
memories.
everybody covered with leeches. Yeah, and you don't feel them because they have an analgesic in their
Yeah,
saliva. And yeah,
completely unaware.
yeah. I had the same experience walking with these terrestrial leeches. You think,
Yeah.
oh, these things are slow. They're never going to catch me. They're already in your shoes. You just don't feel them.
Yeah, where were you? Which part? Where were you on this one?
Oh, that was Malaysia.
Malaysia.
A long time ago. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, many of my experiences are a long time ago. For you, they weren't that long ago.
Well, that's true. Well, um, we will have to have you back on for more experiences
Oh,
from a very long uh,
it's
career.
it's been a pleasure being able to share these with your audience. It's been a joy to reminisce about the many of these experiences, and I would hope that for your audience they get some joy from them, and even better yet, go out and experience some of them themselves. And as
Absolutely, absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know, you don't have to go far. You don't have to go to Africa. You don't have to go to Malaysia to study organisms that are understudied. They
No,
can
no.
they can be in your backyard, right? Um,
Absolutely.
still
Absolutely.
so little we know about bark scorpions. You
Mm,
know, one of the most common animals in the desert Southwest.
yeah.
But yeah,
Uh,
So,
well, it was fantastic to hear, especially for me personally, but I think for everybody, the stories about animals in the wild and the background of all that research, because there's a lot of research going on and published, but these fun parts we don't hear about enough. So that's why I started the podcast, and yeah, these are definitely fantastic stories. This is exactly why we're doing this. So,
well,
thank you
thank you.
very much. If people want to know more about your research, where can we find
But,
it?
the lab website is I'm retired now from the University of Oklahoma,
Mhm.
but Ashley and I maintain a website.
Yes.
I don't have
I'll put it on the screen so people can, and I'll
yeah,
put it in the description under this
yeah,
podcast as
and
well.
I still occasionally log back on to ResearchGate,
All
where I
right.
sometimes provide an update.
Right.
But yeah, especially if they want to keep abreast of the grasshopper mouse system.
Yeah.
Uh,
I will put all that information in with this podcast, and well, I hope to have you on again sometime soon if you can think of more stories. But for now, thank you very much. It was very entertaining.
all right, thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy, truly.